The Spin-Off Podcast Network. This podcast was made with the support of New Zealand On Air.
Ngāi Aotearoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou.
Welcome back to the dawn of 1990s New Zealand and a blast of sound and red and blue at the Commonwealth Games.
To the people of the world, I greet you to Aotearoa, to New Zealand.
That's Dame Whina Cooper at the Mount Smart opening ceremony. 89 years old, she has legend status as leader of the 1975 Land March, that monumental hikoi in protest at Māori dispossession.
This great gathering of people here today reminds me of another great gathering the day my ancestors joined together with the Queen of England representative to sign the Treaty of Waitangi.
At the same time, in downtown Auckland,
the protesters believe the Games are being used to promote a myth of racial harmony and to detract from the issue of the Treaty of Waitangi. One of the speakers at the rally, Rob Cooper from the Māori Council of Churches, says his organisation stands with those who seek to have the treaty honoured.
It's good for the health to be on the right side of history. It's good for the soul to know that we have done what we can in the pursuit of justice. And that is what we are all called for in this country, to pursue the justice that the treaty calls for.
1990, 150 years since the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. As New Zealand projects an image of unity to the world, it continues to grapple with ongoing division, unresolved treaty breaches, and deep pain. And there's a new national government on the cusp of power.
This is the platform on which we've got to build the new millennium.
You can't just come to Cabinet and say, please write me a cheque for $1 billion.
Anathema to the Maori people.
He just came up and stood in front of me, burst into tears.
There's a future to be had out there, and we've got to jointly walk into that future.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Toby Manhire and this is Juggernaut 2, the story of the fourth national government. Episode 5, The Seven Generations Fight. Now let's cross to the Queen.
Ena mana, ena rangatira. Ena haifa. He mihi, anako tene kia koto katoa.
It's Waitangi Day, 1990. Queen Elizabeth II had made it in time for the closing of the Commonwealth Games, and now here she is in the north for the sesquicentenary of the signing of Te Tiriti. 150 years and a day for reflection.
Today, we are strong enough and honest enough to learn the lessons of the last 150 years and to admit that the treaty has been imperfectly observed. The original signatories saw it as a charter for their future. I look upon it as a legacy of promise.
Cries of protest punctuate the Queen's speech, and they continue as Whakahuihui Virko, the Bishop of Aotearoa, begins his whai kōrero.
Some of us have come here to remember what our tupuna said on this ground. That the treaty was a compact between two people. But since the signing of that treaty 150 years ago, I want to remind our partner that you have marginalized us. You have not honored the treaty.
6 years of Labour government have seen the ground move in Crown Māori relations. The march towards state-owned enterprises and asset sales has lit a fire under treaty claims, and the Waitangi Tribunal has been freed up to look into the past. By the time the 1990 election rolls around, the National Party manifesto is pledging to tackle historic grievances.
We will uphold the Treaty of Waitangi by providing fair, fast and affordable redress for the proven injustices of the past. We are not walking down the road to apartheid in New Zealand.
One of the most pressing injustices of the time? Fish. Among the customary rights guaranteed to Māori under the treaty is fisheries. That's really clear. By the early 1980s, it's become obvious that we're running out of fish. And in 1986, a quota system is introduced for commercial fisheries. The objection raised by Māori is, hang on a minute, you're privatising something that you don't own. In 1989, towards the end of the Labour government, 10% of the total quota is assigned to Māori, but that's just a stopgap. A few years later, in 1992, a big corporate fish, Tahu Harvey, decides to put up for sale its stake in Sealord fisheries. That sale comes onto the radar of one Douglas Graham, the Minister for Justice and the First Minister responsible for treaty negotiations.
Douglas Arthur Montrose Graham, originally from Scotland, the Grahams of Montrose. Now in mid-80s and slowly falling to bits, but retaining the marbles more or less.
The maiden leg of what Doug Graham will later call his voyage of discovery is in the restaurants of Parnell.
And I had a strong friendship with Paul Tem, who was then a Queen's Counsel, subsequently a High Court judge, and on the Waitangi Tribunal. So we used to have lunch every couple of weeks and he'd tell me what was going on the Waitangi Tribunal. It made my blood run cold. And I was on the policy committee of the National Party in the run-up to 1990. So I was fairly keen to see something in the policy about Māori claims and how we were going to deal with them. Not that we had much of an idea, but we'd turn our mind to it at least.
One of the earliest claims put to the Waitangi Tribunal, after the extension of its remit back to 1840, comes from Ngāi Tahu, the iwi spanning most of the South Island. Doug Graham hears about the claim, Y27, from Paul Tem.
He was in the middle of the Ngāi Tahu hearings, and he'd tell me some of the things that had happened, and it was just unconscionable, really. Terrible. Things promised, never delivered, boundaries changed, money promised, due, paid to the French, this sort of, and just went on and on.
We'll get into that in a bit. Let's stick for a minute with the fish. It's another of Doug Graham's old friends that alerts him to the Sealords quota sale.
This was a golden opportunity for the Crown to acquire the quota and transfer it to Māori in satisfaction of fishing rights, which by then had been put into statute. And it so happened that Wilson Henare was the chairman of Carter Holt, and I knew him well from my days playing rugby. So I rang Wilson and said, can you hang on and give us a couple of weeks to see if we can sort this out, which he did.
Along with Doug Kidd, who'd replaced Winston Peters as Minister of Māori Affairs, Doug Graham puts together a group that includes iwi leaders Robert Mahuta and Tipino Regan, the former Minister Maturata, the chair of the Māori Council Graham Latimer, and academic Whatarangi Winiata. Also in the mix there somewhere is a buzzy young man recently returned from Harvard, Shane Jones.
And we'd meet in the beehive until 3 a.m, going through the thing and trying to work out how we could get the quota. And it was obviously the one and only pan-Māori settlement, because Māori fishing rights are held by the hapu on the coast. They're not. Some tribes didn't have any fishing rights at all. So we didn't have time to work all that out. But there were a lot of tears. We got very tired, and the strain, because the Māori negotiators knew that whatever they did, they were going to be criticised.
In hui around the country, the negotiators encounter some strong opposition. Add the Sealord chunk to the chunk already held, and you get to just over 20% of the total quota. Given what it says in the treaty, many say that's a serious rip-off. Others question whether they can trust assurances that traditional, customary fishing rights will not be impacted. Then there's the question of a deal that applies across all iwi.
No tribe can bind another tribe to an agreement or to a ritual process or a political process that particular tribes do not agree to be associated with.
This is Apirana Mahuika of Ngāti Porou.
In terms of the Sealords deal, it clearly states that those tribes who are not in agreement with the deal will be bound by the consent of those tribes who want to be part of Sealords. Secondly, the Crown is also saying if those tribes continue to resist the Sealords deal, legislation will be brought about to ensure that they are bound to this deed. Now, that is a gross interference with tino rangatiratanga. There are all sorts of implications for me in regard to tino rangatiratanga, because tino rangatiratanga is a word that is derived from the word rangatira. The word rangatira has genealogical connotations, and because it has that, it is one of the most sacred components of our culture. It is a tapu component of our culture.
That message is ringing in the ears of the negotiators.
Tiffany O'Regan, he almost got cold feet.
This is Bolger's Chief of Staff, Rob Eadie, who is in the room on the deadline night for the Sealords deal.
He's in tears at one point. That, am I doing the right thing for the Mokopuna? Am I committing now something which would be less or diminished for them? I'm making a call which will impact on them for generations to come. And you can see the weight on them, poor bugger.
The deal goes through.
In an historic agreement, government and Māori leaders last night signed the Sealord fishing deal. The signing came after days of lengthy negotiations over the deal, under which the government will buy Māori people a share of the big fishing company Sealord. In return, Māori tribes have agreed to drop all Treaty of Waitangi commercial fishing claims.
Here's Jim Bolger in 1992.
So after 152 years, we can say with honour, both sides can say with honour, we have concluded outstanding business. We now have to move on and conclude outstanding business as it relates to various land claims. They are, in some ways, much more complex, but I'm heartened that having reached this settlement, we can reach other settlements.
Doug Graham.
It's not my future that was on the line, but it was for the Māori negotiators, who had the burden of knowing that their ancestors were talking to them down there yesterday, and that whatever they did was going to affect their Mokopuna in the future. So the difference in the bargaining was great.
And Maturata.
It's not a perfect deal in any sense, but I believe we have an opportunity to build, and build we will, because I think for the first time in the history of the treaty, we'll be able to see something of substance and see something of worth. And more importantly, we are now able to leave the next generation, hopefully a lot more, and they in turn can continue and benefit as they see fit.
The fight doesn't end there. It continues through the courts. But over time, Māori will grow their quota holding. And there are other wheels turning. Even before Sealord, Doug Graham had been talking to Robert Mahuta of Waikato Tainui and Tipene O'Regan of Ngāi Tahu. For both tribes, the unresolved transgressions are long-standing. Both had been seeking justice in Britain and New Zealand since the mid-19th century. Both had taken legal action and lodged claims with the Waitangi Tribunal. And both, by this point, have moved to open new, direct negotiations with the Crown.
Kingitanga is about the people and for the people, for it is your taonga. Nō reira, te iwi, e raurangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa.
Ngārua Wahia, May 1991. Dame Te Ata Irangi Kahu, the Māori Queen, is marking the 25th anniversary of her coronation. Jim Bolger, the much more recently crowned Prime Minister, is there too. But as Adam Gifford reports for Radio New Zealand, the welcome is frosty.
There was various jeers as he came on. There was certainly muttering during his speech. I think there's a feeling that he's coming here, another politician, without anything to deliver. You know, Tainui lost 1.25 million acres during the wars of the last century. Governments here say that they will do something about it, and Tainui is still waiting.
Across Waikato, Tainui and the Kingitanga, memories remain raw around the raupatu, the confiscation of vast tracts of land after the New Zealand Wars of the early 1860s. It was all given a veneer of legitimacy under the Settlements Act of 1863, which authorised retaliation against Māori engaged in rebellion. Essentially, if you defend your land against invading troops, we'll take it. That's more than 1 million acres of whenua, and this is the good stuff. We're talking prime Waikato farming land, confiscated. In 1946, an annual compensation payment to Tainui of £5,000 had been introduced, but that evaporated through inflation. Talks had started and faltered over the years before stalling ahead of the 1990 election.
They're still waiting for negotiations to start. They heard last week that the government is not going to give them back the hopu military camp, as seemed likely under the last government. So there's really not much tolerance there.
So it's fair to say that, like many iwi, Tainui has good reason not to trust the Crown. In 1992, with discussions resumed, that military camp, hopu, becomes available, and Doug Graham sees a chance to demonstrate good faith.
I thought, well, the Crown needs to show that it's for real, and we're not just fiddling around here, we're serious. So hopu became surplus, and I went to the Cabinet and said, why don't we give it back to Waikato Tainui for nothing, just as a token of goodwill, not part settlement or anything. And I think they then realised that we were for real.
Graham's key negotiating counterpart is Robert Mahuta, younger brother of the Māori Queen, Dame Te Ata, and father of Nanaia, who will go on to become a cabinet minister.
And I never forgot Bob Mahuta. I said to him early on in the proceedings, I said, Bob, what happened to your earlier negotiations with the previous government? And he said, oh, look, we just talk past each other all the time. And I said, well, that must have been pretty disappointing. And he said, yes, I went back to Turangawawa and spoke to Dame Te Ata. And I said, look, haven't got anywhere. It's all collapsing. And there was a group of elders there, and one of them said, well, it's better to have nothing than be nothing. I've never forgotten that.
A generation like my own who have spent most of our lives arguing our claim and then now into negotiation, of course, will want to negotiate to a settlement.
They had the concept, as land was taken, so land must be returned. Simple as that. It took me a long time to actually realise how important that was.
Mahuta will later write that Tainui's negotiation had been fuelled by sheer hard work, the strength of convictions, having the courage to endure persecution over the past 100 years, and an indomitable will to see that the raupatu claim is resolved.
If you've got the strength of your convictions, if your argument is sound, it will endure beyond governments.
Both sides knew that we'd have to work together and try and find a way through, which was fair, inter partes, so fair between the tribes and fair between the taxpayer.
Well, like all negotiations, both sides have to give a little in order to gain a little, and that's what happened.
And we would have to help them sell it to Māori, and Māori would have to help sell it to the rest of New Zealand.
There was another tough sell for National, selling the whole settlement enterprise to their own party.
And I, in my time as Minister of Treaty Negotiation, must have gone to, I would think, 500 Rotary clubs, I would think. In those days, nobody really had much of an idea. And I used to say to them, I remember one at Pukekohe full of gnarled farmers, which was very hostile. And I said to them, well, look, what's one of the best things New Zealand's ever sent overseas? Oh, sheep meat, and all this sort of kiwi fruit. I said, no. I said, what about the Maori battalion? And this sort of dead silence, this penny sort of click, click, click. Oh, yes, all right, okay. So you learn as you went along, but there were some pretty torrid sessions, I must say. not everybody was terribly happy about it.
New Zealanders are generally fair.
This is Jim Bolger.
And if you can explain to them that what you're doing is fair, which is a wonderful little word, fair, that they will come with you. You're almost saying, look, just leave this to me. I've got it under control. Just follow me. And they did.
So there's the pressure from voters, national supporters especially, but there's also the pressure from within the party caucus, and within cabinet too. Their question is less one of fairness and more, how much is this going to cost?
We had to try and work out what the country could realistically afford. We didn't ask Māori to agree to it. I mean, this is where a lot of people got a bit confused. There's something obscene about the Crown saying, well, we're the wrongdoer, but we'll set how much we can pay. It is obscene, but there was no other way.
In the cloistered oval of the Cabinet Room, discussions about drafting a settlement strategy and a settlement budget begin properly in 1992. This is at the same time, remember, that the storms over welfare cuts and labour reform are raging all around.
Doug was soldiering away. The Waitangi Tribunal had begun its work. The first of those reports, I remember by this very fire, reading it with a very young newborn son at the time, thinking, grow up, little man, you should read a report like this. It's compelling, and you should know your history, and you should know the scandalous breach of contracts that have occurred.
This is Ruth Richardson, Finance Minister in that first term.
And Doug was starting, to work away seriously at a settlement program. And he just winged it. He came to Cabinet one day and said, well, how about $1 billion? I think I need about $1 billion to fix this. Not make it go away, but fix it.
If you didn't have a figure, then you had no basis on any settlement, Tainui or Tahu, anybody. Because what were you basing it on?
I had two views, and I felt very strongly that ultimately you have to govern by consent. You've got a ballot box, yes, but you've got to govern by consent. And if there are egregious breaches of either treaty undertakings or contractual matters, then you don't have the consent. You have a legitimate grievance, and it has to be dealt with. So that was my personal view. And then my fiscal view was $1 billion sounds like a lot of money in a context where I'm basically wiping billions off welfare benefits, for example.
But there was a bit of guesswork, in all honesty. So there was no absolutes. There was no book you could go and get some figures out of. You had to make judgment calls. And you had to make judgment calls on the value of the day and not of yesterday.
And so I'd said to Doug, there may be merit in your cause, but you can't just wing it. You can't just come to Cabinet and, say, please write me a cheque for $1 billion. You better think about this, and we'll get some structure around it so that there's an incentive for you to settle in a way that best meets the requirements for a financial settlement.
In the swirl of the mother of all budgets austerity, Bolger has another costly structure, a physical structure that he has decided to throw his weight behind in the cause of national identity, the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa. Doug Graham is involved here too. He's the beleaguered Minister for Arts and Culture.
Well, we had to try and find $300 million to build Te Papa at a time when the BNZ was going broke, and so all my colleagues were being asked to slash $50 million off their budgets. Bolger made it clear that there's no good time to build a museum. Let's get started. Let's get on with it.
I thought it was important that New Zealand could centre itself, its history, in a particular place, and Te Papa could do that.
At one point in the first term, a scale model of the proposed museum is plonked in the centre of the Cabinet Room.
I've got the blueprint of Te Papa in my office. Oh. I've still kept it. It's one of the things that I thought was memorable enough to keep. And, of course, it was very alluring, people who were subject to monumentitis, people who wanted a monument, this was very appealing, and Bolger fell for it. He saw this as a monument that he wanted.
Ruth's very competent, very able, but very dogmatic in her beliefs. You know, if you didn't agree with her, well, you were a complete fool.
And of course, I looked at the case and I said, well, maybe, but not yet, Jim. This is not a time for us to be indulging in, national excesses like a national museum. Bide your time, and when we're in a better fiscal position, then, let's look at the merit of the case. And we walked away from that Cabinet Committee meeting with a vote to say we will not fund it at this time.
I had to manipulate the papa through Cabinet, kept it alive and kept moving it forward, and didn't take decisions on a regular basis back to Cabinet at all. No, because I knew they'd say no. So why give them the opportunity?
Well, blow me down. I get to Cabinet on Monday morning and my staff gave me an inkling. We must have got it from the Treasury guy in Bolger's office. We got an inkling that this was on the agenda, which it had to be, the Cabinet Committee had to go up for ratification from the Cabinet, and Jim had changed his mind.
Ruth Richardson reckons that the blame, or the credit, belongs in part at least to Mrs. Bolger.
And I think between Joan and Jim, they'd convinced themselves, we have to do this. This is required for our nationhood. And so I got to Cabinet on Monday, and there was an ambush. Jim basically from the chair said, we've got this proposal, we've thoroughly considered it, we think it's got a lot of merit, it's very important in our nation building, and we're going to do it.
And it went up on time, under budget, and that was, I thought, outstanding leadership at a very difficult time.
Well, you could have blown me down. I argued against it, but lost.
What do you think of it now?
Well, it was funny because I saw the museum building being shifted. So that was on my run
back and forth,
every day. So I'd see the damn thing every day. And I saw the foundations that were like for Africa that had to be built. And I thought, this is just a huge waste of money. I went recently and saw the Gallipoli display, and both my grandfathers fought in Gallipoli, one for New Zealand and one for Australia. And I saw my grandfather's name in the roll call, and I suppose emotionally, I could see that it was something of consequence. To Papa in more recent years, I've got good reason to think of it fondly, but at the time, financially, we couldn't afford it.
As for the treaty settlements, the government is pressing ahead with its two priorities, Waikato Tainui and Ngāi Tahu. Towards the end of 1994, a deal with Tainui takes form. Importantly, it will leave for another day the claim to the Waikato River. But there's also this billion-dollar cap that the politicians have been thrashing out in the background, which will soon spill into public view as the fiscal envelope. Here's Sir Robert Mahuta, speaking to Paul Diamond just about a month before his death in 2001, recalling his discussions with Doug Graham on the final sticking points. They're meeting at the Hopu Hopu camp.
And then Doug said, come on, let's go for a walk again. Let's see if we can talk this through. So we went and walked around the whole camp, the whole perimeter of the camp, talking about it. And I said, well, if we agree to this, Doug, the first thing I want is if it's $170 million, right, then you've got to pay interest immediately until all of that $170 million comes over. Okay.
So interest will be paid until the full sum is delivered. Fine. Then there's the question of the cap. Tainui is to get $170 million out of $1 billion.
And I said, well, Bob, that's 17%. That leaves 83 for everybody else. Does that sound about right to you? They said, yes, that sounded about right. I said, but if the Crown then increases the fiscal envelope and doubles it, you're only going to get 8.5. He said, well, that's not right.
We've got to remain at 17%, and if that changes and the relativity clause comes in, then we get the additional. And Dick said, I can't do that. I've got to blow the bloody fiscal envelope. Then he rang Jim Bolger. If we do that, the bloody fiscal envelope is blown. And there was a bloody long pause, and Jim said, is he likely to sign? And Doug said, yes, he thinks so. I was likely to sign it. Jim says, sign it and agree to it. So that's when we signed it.
So the Crown agreed that it would pay 17% of whatever it cost to settle all the claims.
That's the guts of it.
People haven't really quite figured the importance of that out.
To find the first act of the Ngāi Tahu claim against the Crown, Te Keremea, you need to go back a bit, to 1849. The Crown had promised to put aside 1/10 of all purchased lands for Māori use, and to set up schools and hospitals. It was clear already that this wasn't happening. And so began decade upon decade of breach and swindle, and the entreaties for redress pile up and up.
So I'm Anake Goodall. I've had the benefits, the extreme privilege of working with the wider Ngāi Tahu family since certainly the mid-1980s.
Anake Goodall's involvement with the iwi has spanned everything from dishwasher and errand runner to claims manager to chief executive. He was in the mix as early as the Waitangi Tribunal claim in the 80s, Y27, as evidenced outside in the car park.
Y27, I've got the number plate. Yep. It's a lot of fun to have Y27 parked outside Ngāi Tahu's HQ in the year 2025.
We're meeting at the iwi headquarters in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. On the walls of the boardroom are framed documents, deeds of settlement, class photos of negotiation teams and korowai that tell the story all the way back to last century. For Ngāi Tahu, the history of that wider claim is woven deep.
If there's one binding thread to Ngāi Tahu identity across a very long period of time, it's not large land holdings because they all disappeared. It's not extended, repeated cultural practice all sorts of ways because they very quickly were broken down and attenuated by settler society and distance and so on. And the thing that is the common strand is the shared grievance, the shared claim, irrespective of which bit of this very large Ngāi Tahu landscape you came from, you've got your chapter of that story or that aspect or a bit of the unfulfilled promise.
Ngāi Tahu's thing, it was so complicated. I mean, everything you could think about, mountains and flax, harbours, conservation, land deals, Rakura, just unbelievably complicated. And it took a long time to try and sort out what to do.
Those early meetings were quite a scene.
Doug Graham with his Labrador smoking a cigar at that end of the table, so Tepani puffing on his pipe at this end, and you got some Taupu, there's a Treaty Waitangi Policy Unit, and Justice Department people on this side of the table, and you've got some Ngāi Tahu representatives on this side, and very loose agenda, and you'd talk about stuff for an hour or two. And this is the negotiations process. I did say to Tepani after one of these sessions, we appreciate EPA that this is never going to go anywhere. There's no papers, there's no briefing on either side, there's no sharing of papers, there's no budget. And he puffed on his pipe, looked at me with that very Tepani smile and said, I think you're right, I'm going to make you the claims manager.
They're writing the playbook as they go.
I think the bit of context that really matters here is that there's no precedent for any of this. This is all happening in a complete vacuum as to policy. There's not a budget line anywhere for how you would pay for anything if there was to be a payment. Everything is completely open. So you do have this sort of surreal, almost shock and awe environment, and it is quite brain-bending. There was some very progressive, expansive, innovative ideas being bought by everyone. And to the Crown's credit, they bought their share at that stage.
The talks progress through monthly meetings.
And then, boom, the government drops its fiscal envelope policy.
The fiscal envelope plan for settling treaty claims. The controversial $1 billion cap in the fiscal envelope proposal.
Envelope, $1 billion cap.
That really broke the tenor of the conversation. What it did is it made a lie of the conversations the week before and the month before and the 3 months before, because we were at a table in good faith saying that bit of forest could come over here and we could protect the public access that way, and here's some detail, and in fact we've got some code written up about how you might legislate it. And what the fiscal envelope policy says on page 56 is that thing can never happen and will not happen. So there is some disingenuous behaviour here.
The way Doug Graham recalls it, even without the fiscal envelope, negotiations with Ngāi Tahu had pretty much come to a standstill, slowed down by something like 100 smaller claims from hapu and whānau within Ngāi Tahu.
So I said to Tiffany, well, not much point meeting every month until those ones are dealt with, and then we'll kick off again. But he sort of rushed off to the court and rushed off to the tribunal and tried to issue more proceedings.
And here's how Tipene O'Regan recalls it, speaking a couple of years later on Radio New Zealand.
The Crown went off on its own and developed its policies, which turned up in the form of the fiscal envelope. And that created a period of considerable tension and distance. And while that was happening, Ngāi Tahu spent most of its time in the High Court and in various other jurisdictions trying to contain the position.
For Anake Goodall, the Crown's new settlement policy, including the fiscal cap, is an unmistakable shot across the bow.
The good minister says, we the Crown have now got our policy here, and Ngāi Tahu, you'll be bound by this, and we've decided we're going to change our approach. We'll offer you $100 million, take it or leave it. Your choice, obviously. I must note that there's quite a queue forming outside Office of Treaty Settlements now. You'll have to go to the back of the queue, so it might take a generation or so. And when you get there, well, maybe there's some money left in the $1 billion or not. So just to make the point that at some points, this game is played really hard, right? Really ruthless, quite brutal. Very clear decision that this treatment was not acceptable. We weren't having it, the unilateral nature, the terms of it itself. So we went dark. That leads to Ngāi Tahu litigation strategy. Ngāi Tahu issues various bits of litigation, effectively injunctions to stop the Crown alienating assets. So you want to sell forest, you want to sell coal corp, and you. So we successfully argued to the courts, hold on, we're in the middle of a negotiation, we've got a quantum as yet undefined, there's going to be some assets come across. These are relevant. The Crown should be forced to hold them until it's resolved these issues. And the short version being that the courts agreed. So we started to gum up the Crown's asset rationalisation program. I think at our heyday we had 17 cases in the High Court against the New Zealand government in various forms, and they were biting and very effective.
The strategy and the fiscal envelope spark a series of protests and occupations around the country. For many, it's just the latest indignity after a decade of reforms, beginning with the labour revolution of 1984, that have impacted Māori disproportionately. In October 1994, Mike Smith walks up Maunga Keke, One Tree Hill, and takes to the solitary pine tree.
A police constable testified that when he arrived at the scene, Smith was still attacking the tree with a chainsaw.
It was a non-violent, direct action that I felt was kind of a safe thing to do. And if there was going to be a casualty for that, well, I would be the casualty and nobody else would be.
This is Mike Smith, talking to the spin-off for the Single Object series, 27 years later.
They call them settlement deals, but that's a misnomer, though. It's more accurate to say that they're treaty extinguishment deals. There'd be a limited financial cap of $1 billion, and once that money was gone, it's gone. And of course that made people scramble. It's like, well, once it's all gone, it's gone, so we better not miss out. And so that created a sense of panic. The ambition was, of course, just like fisheries, to sweep the treaty issues off the table once and for all. And so for us, it was not about we want more money or a better deal. It was Te tiriti o Waitangi to us was he kawanata tapu. It was a sacred document that our tupuna put their mokos on, their tohus on, and it was a blueprint for how we would live together moake tonanatu. That was the plan, that it was a blueprint on how people would live together, and it wasn't a deal to be kind of finished. It was an arrangement that would carry on, and these were the rules of the carrying on, if you like. That was completely drowned out by the outpouring of grief towards the tree. You know, the issue became about the tree, the tree, the tree, the tree.
As the government pledges a series of hui to discuss its settlement plan, the protests boil over on Waitangi Day 1995.
Some of the offences seem to be assault, disorderly conduct, willfully setting on fire.
Radio New Zealand News, I'm Heward Humphrey, good morning. Some national MPs are now questioning whether the government should bother to settle Treaty of Waitangi grievances. A number of MPs at a special government three-day caucus in Paihia say the Waitangi Day protesters have antagonised many other New Zealanders. Senior Government Whip John Carter is raising the possibility of reviewing the whole treaty settlement process.
Many people are saying they don't want to have a bar of the treaty, they don't want to have a bar of the treaty settlements if a few irrational people can hijack a celebration and the Maori elders are not able to control them. Then it means that, from their point of view, that the whole thing's out the door.
John Carter, Far North MP and Chief Government Whip. A quick digression here, if you'll forgive me.
You know this treaty, this fiscal thing?
This is a talkback caller on Radio Pacific, just a few weeks after those Waitangi protests. It's a show hosted by John Banks, who's also a Cabinet Minister. The caller says his name is Hone.
What is it, that envelope?
Fiscal drag.
Yeah, boy. Look, I don't want you guys to settle that, eh? Because, man, otherwise, what will I have to do? I won't get any more dole or anything like that if you settle that, Banksy.
Well, isn't that good?
Oh, boy, no. I don't want to have to. I have to do something, man. I think that don't you settle it, because otherwise I won't have anything to moan about anymore. So don't you go and settle that thing too much. And listen, you know, the other night, I ran that radio show that woman's on.
Really?
Cook thing.
Pen cookery.
She was going cook about you guys going over to the rugby over in South Africa. And she was saying, "Oh, you're getting a free trip." Well, what's wrong with a free trip, man? I've been having a free trip all my life, and I think that's really good.
Hone is, in fact, National Member of Parliament John Carter.
There's been angry reaction to the Carter revelations. Northern Māori MP Tahu Henare has quit the MP's rugby team, which is going to South Africa. And Māori Council Chairman Sir Graham Latimer says John Carter's pranks on talkback radio are racist and show he's not fit to be an MP. Labour wants the MP sacked, and New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says in any other administration he'd resign.
And Carter's punishment? He loses the role of Senior Government Whip. In hui around the country, the fiscal envelope gets a battering.
The concept of the fiscal envelope as such is still anathema to the Maori people. They don't like it.
This is a spokesperson for Aotearoa.
It didn't change anybody's mind at all, and I doubt whether it would change the minds of any of the other tribes.
Trying to sell it on the fiscal hui, they were something else again.
You've had two large hui attracting several thousand people, and each time they have rejected the Crown's position. They've basically said to Jim Bolger and co, "You're wrong, and instead of continuing to play your silly games, why don't you really come and start talking properly?"
But looking back, says Doug Graham, there was a real value in the engagement.
There were 13 hui throughout the country, and I think I did 9 of them. Very emotional. I don't think for many of those iwi, it was the first time a minister of the Crown had come and sat down and listened, and there were whistles and haka going and big crowd and old ladies holding photographs of ancestors. Very moving, and even now, 30 years on. I remember on one occasion at one of them, we were all sitting there, and one old chap suddenly appeared from nowhere and came up to the table where I was sitting with my officials. And he was obviously not expected to be a speaker, and he just came up and stood in front of me burst into tears. So I waited for a while and he said, "Minister, thank you for coming." He said, "I was brought up by my grandfather and we survived by farming the roadsides. And I went to school the long way on foot because I could go past the horse trough and there was some molasses in there and I had that for breakfast." He turned around and went back and sobbed all day. My whole team are in tears. So you just wonder sometimes how things could happen.
Over 150 Tainui descendants were on the platform to greet their whanaunga this morning. With haka resounding as the train arrived, the faces of the passengers lit up as they disembarked.
The Tainui Express arrives in Wellington in October 1995. They've come to observe Parliament vote through a $170 million settlement and a formal apology.
It marks a turning point both in our own destinies, both Tainui and the Crown.
Robert Mahuta.
But I think wider still in terms of the destiny of this country, because there's a future to be had out there, and we've got to jointly walk into that future.
The state had before tried to crush the kingitanga, Doug Graham tells Parliament.
But as others have found throughout history, it is not possible to crush those who have right on their side. Sooner or later, justice will prevail. For Waikato, that time has now come.
It's important to underline at this point just what a bargain the Crown is getting. Redress to the value of $170 million for the confiscation of land that at the time, in 1995, is estimated to be worth $12 billion. Or, to put it another way, that's less than 1.5 cents in the dollar. As for Ngāi Tahu, the deadlock with the Crown is only broken when Bolger and O'Regan decide to break it.
Bolger, to his credit, said, "I'm up for this if we think it's real. Can we just all step back and have a go at seeing whether we can write," in those days it was called a heads of agreement, and put the bounds around this. If you Ngāi are up for it, we the Crown are up for it, but we'll need to know by X date.
The election, the first MMP election, is approaching fast.
I don't think there's any votes in it for the government, so this is one reason I respect Prime Minister Bolger. We're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, unquote. Right? So there's principled leadership. We're going to do this despite the fact there's electoral risk, very real, around it, if we think it's realistic. And of course, Ngāi got the other side of that very hard question. Do we think it's realistic to get enough on the right terms to make this? Or will it be better to bet on a future government? And you never know where that goes.
Finally, these decisions are made by the leaders. And no matter how democratically inclined you are, they're finally made by the leaders.
So that leads to the heads of agreement process, and in a very short period of time, the cracking of a framework within which we believe that all this could be done.
Two chiefs, to use their terminology, would have to resolve this. And Tiffany and myself resolved it and moved forward.
Very largely thanks to the initiatives of Jim Bolger, we got the thing on the road again, and Doug Graham picked up the reins, and the whole thing got going.
Here's Tipene O'Regan.
There is no doubt that Doug Graham, who has had tremendous support on this kaupapa from Jim Bolger, Doug Graham has been the leading intellect on the Crown side in treaty jurisprudence. He has driven, with a very generous and vigorous heart, the movement for resolution. He understands it. He and I might have very different views on some aspects of it, but beside that, he does understand the process he's talking about, and he's got a pragmatic view of the political realities which he's got to work in.
But in the simmering heat of an election campaign, nothing is certain.
900 clauses in that Ngāi Tahu settlement. And do we carry on or do we not? We knew it wasn't going to be a vote gather, but the right thing to do is to carry on, and we did.
Here's Rob Eadie, Bolger's Chief of Staff.
The party, particularly the South Island, was quite antagonistic, almost semi-racist, I think, towards it. One senior party official had said, "This is going to cost you the next election, Jim. The South Island will desert you if you stick to this policy." And so, to hell with it. I'd rather lose it than have it. And it was quite funny in a way. You had a leader from a very conservative rural electorate and a patrician liberal urban, but nevertheless, Remuera was, not many Māori live in Remuera, to get this resolved and not resiling at all that the injustices which had to be addressed.
Not because it was politically easy or correct or vote-winning, but it was the moment for New Zealand, that period in the 90s where we decided it was the right thing to do. The call for honour the treaty and this is just fraudulent. You couldn't miss that. It didn't matter the colour of your politics.
Jenny Shipley.
Of course you take your party's interests and their preference into account, but you're required to apply those principles in a way that's in New Zealand's interest. And settling was in New Zealand's interest.
The settlement of Ngāi Tahu's 140-year-old treaty claim is now just an hour away, with Parliament in the final stages of passing its claim settlement bill. Parliament's public galleries are packed with almost 200 members of the tribe after they received special permission from the Speaker to perform waiata and karanga once the bill is passed.
Today the tears you shed are no longer tears of sorrow for past suffering, but tears of joy for the new tomorrow. In your endeavours, you will have the support of the vast majority of all New Zealanders, even though there will be some who will expect a higher standard from you than they set for themselves. Kia tau, te rangamarie, kia tātou katoa. May peace be with all of us.
12 years after its claim was lodged with the Waitangi Tribunal and 149 after its first claim against the Crown, the Ngāi Tahu settlement is done. As with Tainui, this is a $170 million settlement. Ngāi Tahu also secures a relativity clause, and here too, that dollar figure is a fraction of what had been lost.
We knew perfectly well and stated at the time that the assessed value of Ngāi Tahu's loss in $1990 was something of the order of $16 billion. The question is, though, that at that time the society could not have contemplated a figure of that kind. The question was, what was enough to give Ngāi Tahu a platform that could drive it forward?
Is it reasonable that I steal $1 off you and give you a cent back 7 generations later and say, that's it, mate, and I'm sorry? Even the sorry, I'm going to reserve my right to say next week that I didn't mean to sorry at all. Having watched all the sacrifices that have been made to get to here by everyone everywhere, and all the work that's gone into it in good faith and so on, I really hope that those are playing with these things in these contemporary times have got some feel for what they're playing with, because it's far bigger than an electoral, cheap electoral point here or there, in my opinion.
In June 2025, when we asked Jim Bolger to cast his mind back over the big picture of his time as Prime Minister, he says his government faced 2 major challenges.
One was to rebuild the New Zealand economy, which was a total mess. And the second was much more important still, which was to reflect and honestly adjust our attitudes to New Zealand's history. And that's when we started treaty settlements. And to acknowledge the huge mistakes of the early years of European settlement, when effectively the European settlers took over Maori land and sort of assumed it was they were entitled to do so. I mean, clearly you can't reverse the path of history but you can adjust to it. And that's what we were doing with treaty settlements. We're still only partway through accepting the importance of Māori in New Zealand society.
I asked Bolger about the impact of his own background as the child of Irish immigrants.
My parents did not spend time talking about the terrible English oppression of Ireland, though I do remember my father talking about what they described the English military at that stage as black and tans. But I intuitively think that did inform me, that just as the Irish had been very, very unjustly treated by English colonial attitudes, that I understood that and could understand where Māori were coming from, or at least partly understand, I suppose.
Here's Tipene O'Regan, speaking with Henare Te Ua on Radio New Zealand in 1997.
When the deed of settlement, in fact, is signed to Tipene, does that, in fact, herald the end of this saga, that long history of...
The 7 generations, right. It should. We intend that it will. But the great problem has always been that the political players change.
Yes.
And if you look at this historically, what happens is that over time, the state in New Zealand will always tend to chisel away at the minorities, because basically at the end of the day it's controlled by majorities. And the difficulty will be making sure that both sides honour the agreement. And a lot of people say, Henare, that frequently they keep saying, how can you trust these Maoris not to come back again? They'll be back with their hands out at the trough, you know.
We've had it all too.
But the real issue historically has not been Māori failing to honour their agreements, it's been the Crown failing to honour its agreements. And I think in what we've been doing in this round of it, that this goes for Tainui and the other settlements that have been engaged in, I think there's a pretty frank understanding of that on the part of a lot of cabinet ministers and politicians anyhow. And I just think we've got to we've just got to commit ourselves absolutely to making sure the agreements stand and that they are honoured by both sides.
And people say, it's cost too much.
Doug Graham.
I think there are about 60 or 70 settlements now, the total cost of which is the equivalent of about 2 or 3 months' national super.
Doug Graham is pretty much right. As of 2025, according to the Auditor General, 80 settlements have been agreed with 70 groups, costing the Crown a total of $2.7 billion in compensation. $2.7 billion is also what the government in 2025 is spending on 2 new planes and 5 new helicopters for the Defence Force. Or about 40 days of superannuation.
I think the organisation that I first started volunteering for had assets of $90,000 New Zealand. And it ran the whole claim off the back of that and everything else. And here we sit in the headquarters of a tribal authority with $2 billion worth of assets, one way or another, with one full human generation of reinvesting back into its own community. A lot of people focus on the balance sheet, but the number that really inspires me is $1 billion has been transferred to the Ngāi communities since settlement. So it's not about how many gold bricks are in the basement here. There's real resources have gone into these communities to start the repair and the rejuvenation.
This is the platform on which we've got to build the new millennium, and that's going to be, the success of that is going to be determined by the next couple of generations, really, as they pick up from our generation and build on this foundation.
In coalition negotiations following the 1996 election, Winston Peters tears up the fiscal envelope. There will no longer be any formal settlement cap. And in the hurly-burly of mid-90s beehive politics, there are manoeuvres afoot. The coalition is fragile. So is Bolger's grip on the wheel. a secretive group of powerful people are paying a strange amount of attention to the Te Puke bypass.
I believe in more ways than one. It is springtime again in New Zealand.
Cracks are starting to appear in the coalition government.
I just couldn't believe it.
I try to roll Winston.
I have every confidence that Winston and I can work together.
I'll put my integrity up against hers any day of the week.
I thought if that's what they do when I'm out of the country, then to hell with it.
That's next, in the 6th and final episode of Juggernaut 2, the story of the Fourth National Government. Juggernaut 2, the story of the Fourth National Government, is written and presented by me, Toby Manhire, for The Spin-Off, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The producer is Jen Follett, the audio editor and sound designer is Te Aihe Butler, the researcher is Henry Cook, graphic design by Lauren Marie Stewart, archive Maddie Walker, and the executive producers are Sophie Dowson and Duncan Grieve. Archival audio from this episode is from the RNZ collection at Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision, TVNZ via Getty Images, and Radio New Zealand. You can read a full list of sources and other written material that digs deeper into the story by clicking the link in the show notes. Thanks to Amber Easby, Mad Chapman, Anna Rafferty Connell, Isaiah Tour, Ben Fagan, Liam Ratana, and everyone at The Spin-Off. To Steve Russell and the Public Good. Kia ora, this is Toby Manhire. Thank you for listening to Juggernaut. I hope you're enjoying this series. A lot of work from a small but talented group of people went into making this podcast, and we're extremely grateful to New Zealand On Air for supporting the project. It also couldn't have happened without the support of our members. If you like what we do here at The Spin-Off and would like to see more projects like Juggernaut out in the world, then please consider becoming a Spin-Off member. Visit thespinoff.co.nz/members to help us do more of the work you value.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.